Welcome to another episode of WHU Inside Business. I'm your host, Niklas Wittig, and today I'm joined by Mr. Heinrich Rusche. Heinrich is the Chief Revenue Officer of Building Radar, leading the commercial operations of the prop-tech startup based here in Munich that enables leading construction industry players to maximize their revenue potential. Previously, Heinrich worked most notably at McKinsey for almost 7 years. What our viewers may better know Heinrich as, however, is the content creator Firm Learning, the alias under which Heinrich shares insights into consulting and finding success in the early years of one's career. Heinrich can be found on all major social media platforms like YouTube, where he posts to nearly 200,000 subscribers, and on Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, and Twitch. It is Heinrich's broad corporate knowledge base and his extensive social media presence that we will discuss in today's interview. Heinrich, it's a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. Pleasure's mine. Thank you.
Now let's jump right into it. So, Heinrich, we all know you have an extensive foundation of knowledge when it comes to consulting and in a corporate environment. But I want to know, at what times in your career did you gain this knowledge base?
Well, surely many things that I also talk about on my channel Firm Learning are to a large extent influenced by my time in consulting. That was my very first position. Outside of university, it was the position where to date I spent the most time, a bit more than 6 years. Surely that was very instrumental to my personal and professional development, and of course I learned lots of skills there. Then in the roles afterwards at a first and medium-sized fashion retailer, and then later in this Building Radar company, a prop tech startup, that was more about leadership skills, about leading teams, having operational responsibility in a line function. This is of course not necessarily what you will learn in a consulting firm, so very grateful for all these experiences. Looking back at that, I think I was lucky enough to get exposure to a nice variety of different roles and responsibilities, and looking forward to further grow going forward.
And this diverse knowledge base was what allowed you to really start the platform Firm Learning, right?
Sure, that was definitely helpful. So some of the early topics I started the channel with were, on the one hand side, communication, both oral and written, and then specifically slide writing, right? So how to create slides like these big leading consulting firms, McKinsey, BCG, Bain, and the likes. And after creating the first videos, I did indeed realize that, of course, there's a certain demand for that. And frankly, also when working in corporate, when working with these companies, I think it's, of course, a fact that for better or worse, surely in consulting, there's a very special focus that the people have on these types of skills. And it's also easy to argue that maybe it's a bit exaggerated, and I think to some extent that's also true. But of course, the takeaway is that you do learn quite a lot of things if you really want to create documents, for instance, like this, that really meet the highest standards of professionalism. And of course, I do hope that I can share some of this knowledge then also with the audiences.
And what really motivated you to start the YouTube channel specifically? Because that was the first kind of social media platform that you targeted, right?
Yeah. So already a few years before that, I launched a small online course on an online course platform about exactly these topics, communications, slide writing. And there I realized that, oh yeah, there seems to be some type of interest for these types of topics. And so the initial idea of the YouTube channel was that maybe it might be fun to just expand on that a little bit more, just talk about these topics a little bit more. So it's also the fact that there wasn't a big master plan behind it, right? So it's not that I was contemplating this for years and years. It was more a silly idea, right? And the situation at that time was end of 2019 that I just left consulting, left McKinsey, joined this C-level position at this medium-sized fashion retailer. And of course, that was still a challenging job, but surely in the evenings you had a little bit more time. So you wondered, so what are you doing now with all this free time, right? And of course, in the beginning, maybe you're watching some movies, watching Netflix in the evenings, doing stuff like that. But then at some point you also realized, okay, I cannot just continue doing this every single day for the next weeks and months and years. And then of course in early 2020 also the whole health situation came along, which probably led to even more home office. And so it was just, I think I read about it somewhere, about opportunities of starting YouTube channels, and this might be a great, nice thing. At the time I asked my wife whether I should do it, right? Whether that would be a good idea. And she told me, are you crazy? Like, why would you, who starts a YouTube channel? Like, what are you even trying to do with that? And so I then didn't do it at first, but then a few more weeks passed. And then at some point I just said, let's just start, doesn't matter, right? So I just uploaded a couple of videos. I was a bit worried in the beginning. What are people going to think? Will I make myself ridiculous, just making a fool out of myself? So I wasn't really telling anyone in the beginning, and I was just promoting the videos in some student Facebook groups, just posting them on some Facebook groups. And then after the first videos, I just saw that there was some traction, right? That at least some people seemed to like it. In the beginning, of course, it was very slow, right? Just every day a handful of views, and every single view really, I mean, of course, it's great. You're monitoring the statistics, and it's, of course, a great feeling to see that then over time, the numbers are going up. And of course, then the more viewers came, then the more confident I also was talking about it. Of course, realizing that apparently there do seem to be some people who take some value out of it.
And now, especially in the world of BWL here in Germany, Firm Learning is an established, almost household name, you could say. You boast 200,000 subscribers on YouTube. You're on every social media platform. It's almost a full-time job at this point. Yet still, you operate as a chief revenue officer at Building Radar. How do you manage that full-time job with this social media career?
Yeah. So I would lie if I would say that it is super easy. Of course, now especially also this role in startup is quite demanding as well and takes a lot of time as well. It comes down to what you really want to do, what you want to focus on, and some processes. So at the beginning, it was very important to me to stay consistent with releasing weekly videos. So I just had a process where every single week I was creating it, mostly on the weekends, sometimes on the evenings, and then bringing them out. And surely of some videos I'm more proud than of others, so surely there are some videos where I felt a bit rushed. But actually, funny enough, the one video that to date got the most views, right? So arguably the most successful one was such a video where I actually didn't even have lots of time. I wasn't a bit in a rush, needed to leave, so just quickly created something. So it's sometimes really funny, right? How all of this works. You just need to commit to do that, right? And that's, I think, my experience throughout my whole life. If you really want to do something and you make it a priority, then there's always some time to find the time for it. I would consider myself rather busy, but still, if I'm honest to myself, I still spend lots of time in front of my PC scrolling random websites or doing some other stupid stuff, right, that isn't really anything meaningful. So I think there's always some time that you can make available if you really want to do it.
So you would say it's really about motivation in that sense, and that the motivation drove you to that success?
So I think it's very different person by person, what drives you and how you can really set yourself up in a way that this really works for you. For me, I always knew that deadlines worked really well for me, right? So if I had something that needed to be done maybe in 3 months, I would be very bad, right, at already doing everything in advance and step by step to then have it done. But I would always, throughout my whole life, I would always be in the position that then I would do nothing and then only a couple of weeks before or a couple of days before I would do it. So this typical procrastination problem. I think this is probably why also consulting was a good fit for me, because there, usually you always have tight deadlines, tight runway. It's rarely the case that you're doing something and there's no feedback whatsoever and only in a couple of months something is due, right? So for this, it worked quite well. And in this regard, I think also running something like a YouTube channel is a similar setup, right? Because every week you need to do it. And then, of course, probably you say to yourself, oh, let me maybe at the beginning of the week get it done. Of course, you don't do it. And then it's Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And then somehow you need to come up with a video. But then again, if you really want to, then you can find the time for it. That's at least my humble experience.
You know, I would have never taken you as a procrastinator at heart.
It's
Depending
very bad,
on
trust me.
your platform totally portrays a different image. But speaking about things that perhaps your audience doesn't know, would you be able to share with us some insights on Firm Learning, some behind the scenes on the process, and some behind the scenes into the mind of Heinrich Rusche?
That's a very big question. I mean, I really started these videos with almost nothing, right? So I didn't have any camera, I didn't have any equipment. And this is, I think, what also holds many people back, right? People who want to start a project like this, they're like, oh, if I do it, it needs to be perfect, right? So I need to have the fancy camera, the fancy lighting equipment that we here have also in this room in front of us. And probably all of this costs easily several thousand euro or dollar, right? I didn't have all of this in the beginning. I had an old GoPro that was already like 5 years old that I never really used. My wife gifted it to me at some point because apparently she hoped that I would use it, but I didn't really. And then at some point I remembered, okay, I have this one, so let me just try it out. The video quality was rather bad. The audio was extremely bad. Then at some point I realized actually my phone shoots better videos, so I used that one. And then just over time I upgraded. If I look back, the first videos are very simple, to say the least, right? And I think it's a big fallacy to think you need to be perfect at start, because the truth is also, even if you have the very best equipment, if you're just starting out, you will never create the videos from the start, never create the content from the start to the high level, because having the equipment is only a building block, but only one of many building blocks, right, for the process of creating videos. Now, if we talk about that. So I think what works well is to just press record, right? If you want to do this, if you want to get started, and this was at some point the mindset that I happen to adopt as well, and I can just encourage all of you, if you're interested in stuff like that, to just follow this route too.
I mean, you're almost motivating me to just start the record button right now, honestly. You're lowering the barrier of entry.
Happy to do that.
To kind of summarize your platform as a whole, you talk about consulting skills, you talk about how to operate yourself in a corporate environment, amongst another range of different things. If you had to summarize 1 to 2 main points that you wanted to share with our audience, what would those be?
So in terms of these skills that we also talked about, communication, slide writing, and so on, I was always so amazed. Now, coming, of course, biased by this consulting education, by going through this process for years and years, I was always amazed how little, not everyone, but many people, even in very senior positions, also in big, large corporate firms, know about these skills or are mastering these skills. And at least as soon as you know them and realize them, it's really, you just cannot unlearn it, right? You cannot unsee it. And I do think it makes a very big contribution, has a very significant impact just on how you are perceived professionally, and which is why I can just encourage everyone to really think about these topics. It's not necessarily something you learn in business school, of course. They give some presentations, some group work and so on. But I think the feedback is rarely tailored really towards these types of things that you receive. So expose yourself to these environments. It's, I think, no secret that I do think that consulting is probably not the only pathway, but at least a very valid pathway for many people just to start off their career, to pick up on these skills. And if you are just remotely interested in getting exposure to these topics, I think that might be a good first choice. So surely there are other great pathways as well.
And if you had to pick a skill in specific, though, is it something in communication, something in slide building, something in the way you dress, perhaps even? What one thing should young individuals hone on at the very beginning?
So I think it's difficult to pick one skill, but what I've observed several times, probably even more outside of consulting, even if you start in a corporate world or somewhere else, what I've observed several times is that, I mean, the question is, where can you excel as a junior, right? You're fresh out of university, starting your career in a corporate environment or in a company, it doesn't matter how large it is, right? Of course, you're not the expert yet, right? You might have learned a couple of things in business school, but you don't have the very deep domain knowledge to really get your head, right? So the question is, how can you contribute? And of course, communication skills, things like this is something that then you can use, but this also requires that there is something that you can communicate that is of value, right? So probably also here, you can only then really get the returns on that probably a couple of years into your career. But I think the probably 2 things that you can learn, even as a junior, and that many other people are not necessarily good at, and that can really then therefore help you to position yourself, are, maybe that's a bit cliche, but Excel and PowerPoint, right? I mean, this is something that all the big corporates need. Like, it's a need in all of these firms. And I've witnessed it plenty of times. You are a very junior person, but you just happen to be very good in Excel. That then suddenly maybe a team lead or even a more senior person realizes this, sees this, and then drags you onto their project, their initiative. And now you're building this fancy big Excel model for whatever topic, right? But now you're suddenly involved in a strategic project that is very important, very relevant. I've seen this even for interns happening in corporate environments, right? And the same thing is true for PowerPoint skills. If you're really good at building slides, I think even in large corporates, even though it's like a board and so, they realize, shoot, I don't have people who are good at creating presentations, right? And if they realize you are this person, you can do it, then you might find yourself at very early stages in your career suddenly involved in maybe a very big strategic project where you are creating the documents for. Again, there are other things you can do surely as well, but these are things that I've observed several times that this can pay off also very early in your career.
I know that you've shared a lot with us today. So I'm going to ask you a very difficult WHU Inside Business classic question. If you had to pick 1 to 2 books that aligns with the knowledge that you've shared with us today, what would those 2 books be?
There are surely many books that I think inform my thinking a lot. One that I specifically recommended, because also I know it's not one of these standard books that everyone reads anyway, is from Andy Grove, High Output Management, it's called. Andy Grove was the Intel CEO for many, many years. He is, for instance, the inventor of OKRs, Objectives and Key Results, the methodology that I think not many people talk about and many companies implemented. And he wrote a book that's called High Output Management. I got this book gifted during an MBA field trip to the Silicon Valley, where we spent there about 2 weeks meeting different stakeholders there. And there we visited the office of Andreessen Horowitz in the Silicon Valley, which is probably one of the most renowned VCs worldwide. And then all of us visiting there received 3 or 4 books, right? And one of them was from Andy Grove, High Output Management, and it just describes how to be a good manager, right? And of course, this is probably even more relevant a couple of years later in your career once you maybe lead a team. But even as a junior, I think there's some great learnings from that. It's a very hands-on book with, I think, some very valuable insights.
I mean, my bookshelf just got bigger already.
Great to hear.
Heinrich, I thank you so much for coming on today. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on WHU Inside Business.
Thank you.
To our viewers out there, thank you so much for tuning into this episode of WHU Inside Business, and we will see you on the next one.